My mother rolled her eyes the second I walked into that Massachusetts courtroom. Not subtle. The kind that screams, "Here we go," like I'm some inconvenience in her perfectly rehearsed victim story. But then Judge Brennan froze mid-shuffle through his papers, his eyes locked on my face, and I watched recognition hit him like a freight train. "Wait," he said slowly, setting down his pen. "These allegations are against you? You're the defendant?" My parents sat there confused, clueless. They had no idea who I really was. And honestly, that made what came next so much sweeter. Because I'm not just their abandoned daughter. I'm the senior prosecutor who spent the last decade putting manipulators exactly like them behind bars. Let me take you back 32 years. I was 3 months old when my mother Diane decided motherhood cramped her style. She was 18, fresh out of high school in Newton, Massachusetts. My father Scott was a promising hockey player for the Boston Bruins, living his dream under the bright lights of TD Garden. A screaming infant didn't fit their Instagram perfect life. So, they did what selfish people do. They dropped me at my grandparents' house in Brookline one cold October morning and basically vanished. My earliest memory is standing on a wooden stool in Grandma Helen's kitchen, maybe 4 years old, dumping chocolate chips into cookie dough. She never stopped me, never got frustrated. She'd just laugh and say the best cookies have extra love and extra chocolate. Grandpa William would walk through the door still wearing his Supreme Court robes, scoop me up with flour in my hair, and ask about my day like I was the most fascinating person alive. I'd tell him about the ants I found in the backyard, and he'd listen like I was presenting oral arguments before the highest court in Massachusetts. They never badmouthed my parents. Not once. When I asked why Mommy and Daddy didn't live with us, Grandma would smile sadly and say they were busy with important things. I believed that for years because kids believe kind people. But I wasn't stupid. I noticed how other kids' parents showed up to soccer games at Brookline Field while mine didn't. How friends talked about Thanksgiving dinners with aunts and uncles and cousins, while I spent holidays with two people who went to bed at 8. The visits from Diane and Scott were predictable. Christmas, maybe my birthday, if the stars aligned. Diane would arrive wearing designer clothes from Newbury Street, kiss the air near my cheek, spend the entire visit on her phone. Meanwhile, Scott stayed in the car honking until she came out. The few times Grandpa dragged him inside, you could cut the tension with a knife. Grandpa had zero respect for him. That was obvious. Here's what nobody knew. Grandpa gave Diane $3,000 every single month starting when I was an infant. Over 20 years, that's more than $800,000. She took every penny and gave nothing back. No visits, no calls, no presents. Just excuses and requests for more money when Scott's businesses failed. The sports bar in Quincy that lasted 11 months. The coaching company with 0 clients. The memorabilia shop in Cambridge that filed bankruptcy within 2 years. When Grandma Helen died suddenly from a stroke during Thanksgiving weekend when I was 18, my world shattered. She collapsed in her garden, planting tulip bulbs for spring. I drove home from Boston University that night, 6 hours of crying. Found Grandpa sitting in the dark garden holding those unplanted bulbs. We sat together until sunrise. Diane and Scott came to the funeral, stayed for the service, left before the reception. That's when I stopped making excuses for them. That's when I accepted some people are fundamentally selfish, and blood doesn't obligate you to anything. After Grandma died, something fundamental shifted between Grandpa and me. We became partners in survival. Those Sunday dinners became sacred. Sometimes he cooked his famous New England pot roast. Sometimes I experimented with Grandma's handwritten recipes, her looping cursive on yellowed index cards. Sometimes we just ordered pizza and ate from the box watching old movies. But the real value wasn't the food. It was Grandpa teaching me everything about the law, about justice, about using power responsibly. I graduated top of my class from Boston University Law School. Grandpa sat front row recording everything on his ancient camcorder. My parents sent a card, 2 sentences. Good job, proud of you. I stopped being surprised by their absence years earlier. Landing a prosecutor position right out of law school in the Massachusetts District Attorney's Office was partly Grandpa's doing. He made calls, vouched for me personally, promised I wouldn't waste the opportunity. I didn't. I worked harder than anyone in that office. Stayed late, came in early, took cases other prosecutors avoided because they were too complex. Financial fraud, political corruption, white-collar crime, requiring weeks of document review in windowless rooms. By 30, I was handling high-profile cases that made headlines in the Boston Globe. My personal life was non-existent. 70-hour weeks were normal. I lived on Dunkin' coffee and takeout and the satisfaction of watching guilty people face consequences. No dating, no drinks with colleagues, no time for anything except work and Sunday dinners with Grandpa. Those dinners remained untouchable. No matter how exhausted I was, I showed up. He never missed one either, even when he was in his 80s and moving slower. Diane called once during this period. I was 28, hadn't spoken to her in 3 years. She wanted help with Scott's legal problem, some business dispute in Revere. I told her I was a criminal prosecutor, not a civil attorney, and even if I wasn't, I wouldn't help Scott with anything. She called me ungrateful. I hung up. When Grandpa died at 87, peacefully in his sleep in that big Brookline house, I felt that familiar emptiness return. But this time I wasn't a lost 18-year-old. I was 32, and I had become exactly who he raised me to be. The will reading happened 1 week later at the attorney's office on State Street. I expected maybe some books, his watch, personal items. What I got was everything. The Brookline house worth $1 million alone, investment portfolio, savings, life insurance. $3 million total. Everything he spent 40 years on the Massachusetts Supreme Court building. He left to me with one provision in a sealed letter. My dearest Haley, it began. You earned this through showing up, through loving me and your grandmother when others could not be bothered. I cried reading that letter. Not sad tears, validation tears. The attorney handed me another envelope. Documentation. Bank statements showing Grandpa gave Diane $3,000 monthly for over 20 years, more than $800,000 total. Emails from her asking for more. Texts promising to visit and then canceling. Letters from Scott requesting money for failed business ventures. Your grandfather anticipated they might contest this, the attorney said. He wanted you armed with proof. Exactly 30 days later, my attorney Thomas called. Diane and Scott filed a lawsuit, claiming undue influence, saying Grandpa was incompetent, that I manipulated an old man for his money. I actually laughed. The irony was beautiful. They assumed I was still that abandoned baby, easy to intimidate. They had no idea I'd spent the last decade prosecuting people who thought they were above the law. Which brings us back to that courtroom. Judge Marcus Brennan had been Grandpa's clerk 23 years ago before becoming a judge himself. He knew exactly who I was. Your Honor, I need to disclose I had a professional relationship with Judge Parker, he said. If either party objects to me hearing this case, speak now. My mother's attorney Richard Palmer whispered frantically with my parents. Finally, Palmer stood. No objection, Your Honor. Big mistake. Palmer's opening statement was fiction disguised as sympathy. He painted Diane as a devoted daughter cruelly separated from her loving father by manipulative grandparents who poisoned the relationship. Judge Parker was suffering from profound grief after losing his wife of 60 years, Palmer argued, voice dripping with synthetic emotion. He was vulnerable, depressed, and the defendant exploited that vulnerability. This will doesn't reflect Judge Parker's true wishes. Thomas stood for our opening. He didn't need dramatics. Your Honor, this case is simple. Judge Parker was brilliant, careful, and intentional. He left his estate to the person who earned it through 32 years of consistent love and presence. The evidence will show the plaintiffs received over $800,000 while barely maintaining contact. Palmer called Diane first. She took the oath dressed in conservative black minimal makeup, playing the grieving daughter perfectly. He was everything to me, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she'd clearly brought for this performance. When he offered to watch Haley while Scott and I got established, I thought it was temporary. But they kept her, made me feel guilty every time I couldn't visit. They turned my daughter against me. Thomas stood for cross-examination. Professional, direct, deadly, Mrs. Morrison, you voluntarily left Haley with your parents when she was 3 months old. Yes. But I was young, dealing with a lot. According to your father's calendar, you visited 4 times in Haley's first year, Christmas, Easter, her birthday, and 1 random Saturday in July. Accurate? Diane's face flushed. I had expenses. I was supporting Scott's career. Thomas pulled out bank statements. Your father gave you $3,000 monthly for over 20 years. That's over $800,000, Mrs. Morrison. Meanwhile, according to his calendar, you saw him 8 times in the last 10 years of his life. Less than once a year. And you call this devoted daughter behavior? When was the last time you saw your father before he died? Long silence. It was his 84th birthday, 3 years before his death. You came for 90 minutes, left before cake, didn't see him again until the funeral, correct? I think so. Yes. Thomas let that sink in. One final question. Isn't it true you stopped coming around when he stopped giving extra money beyond the monthly allowance? That when he retired and told you monthly payments would continue but extra funds would stop, you visited exactly 0 times in the following 3 years? Scott's testimony was worse. He couldn't name a single school event he attended. Thomas projected photographs on the screen. Haley's high school graduation. There's Judge Parker front row. There's her grandmother. Where are you, Mr. Morrison? I might have had something. You didn't come. You missed her college graduation, law school graduation, every significant moment. And now you want half the estate earned by the man who actually showed up. Palmer tried the incompetence angle, calling a psychiatrist who'd never met Grandpa doctor. Hughes diagnosed depression based on absolutely nothing. Thomas destroyed him on cross. So you diagnosed a man you never met with a condition not present in his medical records, and used that imaginary diagnosis to question his mental competency? Our witnesses were unshakable. Judge Andrew Mitchell testified. Grandpa was sharp until the end. Margaret Chen, his estate attorney, confirmed he was methodical and intentional 2 years before death, anticipating this exact lawsuit. Then I took the stand. Thomas walked me through 32 years. Every missed event, every broken promise, every unanswered call. I kept my voice steady, factual, prosecutorial. Palmer tried to rattle me on cross. Isn't it true you manipulated him? I leaned forward. Mr. Palmer, I spent years loving my grandfather. If inheritance was my motivation, I wasted a lot of time. I could have been building my own wealth instead of having dinner with an old man every Sunday. But I chose him because he was worth more than any amount of money. Something your clients never understood. Judge Brennan's ruling was swift. The court finds Judge Parker's will reflects his true intentions. No undue influence, no incompetence. The evidence shows a pattern of absence by the plaintiffs and presence by the defendant. The will stands as written. Furthermore, I'm awarding attorney fees to the defendant. The plaintiffs brought this case without merit. My ruling stands. The gavel came down, with a sharp crack. As we left, Diane approached crying. Haley, please, can we talk? I looked at her. There's nothing to talk about, Diane. I'm your mother. No. You're the woman who gave birth to me. My mother was Helen Parker. You had 32 years to show up. You chose not to. Don't contact me again. We're done. I walked out without looking back. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. Grandpa had given me one last gift, proving I wasn't wrong, that love matters more than blood, that showing up matters more than showing off. 3 years later, I became a judge at 33, one of the youngest in Massachusetts history. I wore Grandpa's judicial robe my first day. At 38, I was appointed to the Massachusetts Supreme Court, taking his former seat. I wrote landmark opinions rewriting family law. Family is not a biological accident, I wrote. It is a daily choice. Actions matter, presence matters, consistency matters. Biology doesn't guarantee anything. Diane died 5 years after the trial. Heart problems. Scott called asking me to visit. I declined. She wasn't part of my life. Her death didn't change that. Scott died 2 years later. I felt nothing. 20 years after Grandpa's death, they renamed the courthouse the William Parker Justice Center. I stood at the dedication looking at his portrait. We did it, Grandpa, I whispered. Everything you hoped for. At 60, after 30 years on the bench, I retired. My final visit to their graves at Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, I planted more tulip bulbs around their headstones. Thank you for choosing me, I said, for loving me, for making me who I am. Because here's the truth, family isn't who shares your DNA. Family is who shows up every single day for a lifetime. Blood may create connection, but only action creates family. That's not just my story, that's justice. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose between toxic family and the people who truly showed up for you, drop a comment below sharing your experience. Hit that subscribe button for more stories about standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. And remember, you don't owe loyalty to people who never earned it. Thanks for watching.